It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Sidney Mintz, who's giving today the second lecture of a series of three on the Caribbean, which is entitled Three Ancient Colonies, Caribbean Themes and Variations, which is co-sponsored by the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African American Research and the Department of Afro-American Studies. So for those of you who were here yesterday, I apologize if I repeat some of the same points, although they always bear repeating for such a great and distinguished figure as we have as our guest today. But I understand some of you are new today and are joining us for the first time, and I hope will come again tomorrow to hear the final lecture in the series. So let me very briefly offer some comments on the remarkable life and career of one of America's most distinguished anthropologists, in fact, one of the world's most distinguished anthropologists. Professor Sidney Mintz has taught at many universities in the United States and abroad, but his principal positions have been at Yale University, of course, from 1951 to 1975, where I gather he's proudest of the fact that of the many awards he won was the award for excellence in teaching. And he took a chance, a risk really, to leave Yale to go to Johns Hopkins to found an entirely new department of anthropology there, one which focused on anthropology and history, political economy, transatlantic studies. And he succeeded brilliantly in that endeavor, in fact, creating one of the most interesting and influential departments in the country. And for those of you who understand the challenges of institution building and its importance, you will appreciate that achievement. But it is his accomplishments as a scholar that he's perhaps particularly known, as a field anthropologist, certainly, as a wonderful ethnographer, and as a brilliant theoretician in the field of political anthropology. For him, it is crucial to place the understanding of cultural meaning and value within the context of the social relations of production, and to always ask of the latter how it came into being and how it was transformed. Of the many books, articles, and edited volumes which he has produced over his prolific career, I have time to only highlight a few. A now classic of modern anthropology, published in 1960, Worker in the Cane, which is unusual, among other things, for its use of a life history method, a biography of a peasant worker, to explore the larger political economic system in which he was enmeshed. Indeed, these same issues were revisited in 1970 in a book, Caribbean Transformations, which looks at the same problems in a broader comparative perspective, which he brings to bear, in fact, today in these series of lectures. But it is while he was at Johns Hopkins that he published what is perhaps his most celebrated work to date, Sweetness and Power, which came out in 1985. This is a very complex, a very subtle analysis of sugar production in the Caribbean and its links to sugar consumption in various metropolitan centers of Europe, and puts forth the argument that the meaning and popularity of a commodity like sugar changed in relation to the system of class relations that in turn shifted in the course of the history of industrial Europe. Not only is it one of the clearest and most powerful works in the field of political economy, it is also one of the earliest in the anthropology of the transatlantic, or what we might now call transnational nexus of production and consumption of any area in the world. Now, as all of these works might suggest, Sidney Mintz has had a lifelong interest, one might say a passion for food, but it is not perhaps until one reads his critically acclaimed popular book, Tasting Food, Tasting Freedom, published in 1996, that one realizes how deep-seated that interest lies in his own passion for cooking and, of course, eating good food. He is, if his reputation is to believe, no slouch as a chef and second to none as a gourmand. But it is not his culinary talents. I wish he had whipped up, in fact, our reception food, though I'm sure savory it will be. It is not his culinary talents that we'll enjoy today, but rather a confection of an entirely different order, but I assure you no less delicious, and I am sure filled with humor and warmth. He will speak today on Haiti for about an hour or so, and then we will have time for about a quarter of an hour for question and answers. So please join me in welcoming warmly Professor Sidney Mintz.
Can I be heard? Then I did turn it on. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction, Steve. Since you made reference to the fact that I sometimes work on food, I should like to begin by saying that my father had very little appreciation of my talents as a cook. He was a cook. And he would say things like, slice the roast beef, and I would slice the roast beef, and he would say, PhD in anthropology, he still doesn't know how to slice a standing rib. And in that book on food, tasting freedom, I make the remark that he and his friends are no doubt looking down upon me now, and he's saying to them, that's my son, he makes his living talking about food. As Steve indicated, I'd like to talk today about Haiti. In my remarks yesterday, I tried to set the course for these lectures. Each addresses a different Caribbean society. But I see these three societies as part of a region that takes its coherence from certain common historical features. Overseas economic and political control. The production of a few basic commodities for European markets. And slavery is the predominant source of labor power on agricultural estates. But the imperial societies which created colonial microcosms in the Antilles were culturally different from each other. Different, too, were the physiographic conditions in each such colony: size, terrain, rainfall, soil fertility, ocean currents, and so on. Using each of these three cases to make a different point about the past, my hope is that we will be able to see more clearly the larger region of which they are parts. This afternoon I wish to talk about the so-called Black Republic, the hemisphere's second sovereign state, the Republic of Haiti. When Napoleon sent his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, to the war-torn French colony of Saint-Domingue to put down the revolution there, he told him to do away with those gilded monkeys, singes dorés, who were in charge of the rebellion itself. Napoleon had in mind most of all a former slave named Toussaint, who had come to be called Louverture. Toussaint Louverture had once been the coachman of a French planter on the Breda plantation in the north of the colony. Over time, he had gone from being a coachman to being a brigadier general in the French army. He took part in the fighting that led up to the revolution and distinguished himself both for bravery and tactical brilliance. He emerged as the leader of a pacified colony in which the slaves were free. But Bonaparte's plans to re-enslave the Haitians turned on kidnapping Toussaint. He was abducted by General Rochambeau and hurriedly shipped away from Saint-Domingue on a French man-of-war. Imprisoned in a dungeon in the Jura Mountains, he soon died of pneumonia. It is now said that officers who had once served under him in Saint-Domingue saluted him along the route by which he was transported by his captors to the prison where he died. The story is probably apocryphal, but the buttons from the jacket Toussaint wore in prison made their way by a circuitous route to the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York City, where you can still see them. The revolution, in which Toussaint figured importantly enough to have poems written about him by both Lamartine and Wordsworth, lasted nearly 14 years all told. On January the 1st, 1804, General Jean-Jacques Dessalines, whom the Haitians call Papa Dessalines, declared Haitian independence. The second nation in the hemisphere, Haiti will mark its 200th anniversary this coming January 1st. The successful national struggle of every nation is unique, but that of the Republic of Haiti is extraordinary. the only known instance in human history when slaves rose up and successfully wrested the nation from their owners, the revolution became known in the West as a nightmare, by which was meant the burning of the plantations and the killing of white people that accompanied the revolution. But the term nightmare, as used by Haiti's enemies, stood for much more than such violence. The people who clamored most loudly against the Haitian Revolution were the owners of other humans in the slave societies that dotted the New World tropics. As Dr. Johnson pointed out long ago, slave owners were intensely freedom-loving folk, believing in freedom as intensely as they believed in slavery. The question for them was freedom for whom and freedom from what? Formerly France's most lucrative colony, earning for France in many years more than India did for Britain, a free Haiti now sat amid the thriving slave-based island plantation enterprises of 5 major powers: Denmark, England, the Netherlands, France, and Spain, and uncomfortably close to the biggest slaveholding nation of them all. The historians who have written about how threatening the newly minted United States was to Europe's monarchies when it gained its independence a few years earlier should reflect on what might have seemed even more threatening at that time. By taking back their own bodies in the only way that they could, the Haitian revolutionaries made a statement not only about political freedom, but also about property. The American Revolution a few years earlier had made somewhat different statements in view of the place of slavery in its economic, political, and social life. And of the two revolutions, what the Haitian Revolution implied was much the more terrifying at the time. It was one thing to talk about the right to be represented politically if one were taxed. It was quite another to give one's life to fight back against rape, flogging, and the owning of humans by other humans. The Haitian rebels were absorbed with something more radical and perhaps more modern than making a colony sovereign. Witness the most enlightened members of European nobility who understood the North American arguments perfectly. The Lafayettes and Rochambeaux, the Kosciuszkos and Pulaskis, the Steubens and Kalbs flocked to Washington's army. But no freedom-loving nobleman showed up to fight alongside the slaves who sought their freedom under Toussaint, Dessalines, Rigaud, and their lieutenants. It was not that what they wanted was not understood. It was that nobody wanted to give it to them. And so we keep in mind that of 3 revolutions of that century, it was the Haitian Revolution that ended slavery. Until well into the 1820s, Haiti's people were still paying indemnities to France to preclude the possibility of reinvasion. In effect, they were made to pay for the value of themselves and their own labor, past and future. The Vatican, always cautious, refused to sign a concordat with the Haitian government until 1860. The United States could not recognize Haiti until 1864. The very idea of a black political representative of a sovereign state being officially received in our national capital scared the pants off American patriots. Modern states, such as China or Vietnam or Cuba, have no idea how very old is the deployment of political pariahdom. Some scholars have suggested that the Haitian Revolution was premature. The world was not quite ready for a free black nation born of revolution. But for the slaves of Saint-Domingue, the revolution did not come one moment too soon. In fact, its reality probably did much to advance the cause of freedom elsewhere in the hemisphere. It made clear to many slaves and to some slaveholders that freedom could actually be won by violent resistance. It also played a role in Napoleon's decision after his brother-in-law's eventual defeat at the hands of the rebellious slaves to expedite the Louisiana Purchase. Without Saint-Domingue, the will to maintain a French possession on the mainland next to the United States vanished. Damn sugar, damn coffee, damn colonies, Napoleon is said to have exclaimed after Leclerc's defeat. He moved rapidly to sell those 565 million acres for the princely price of $15 million U.S. Which is certainly not to say that the people of Haiti, having won their freedom, would prosper under enlightened and democratic rule. Far from it. That so valiant a people in war should be so persistently defeated in peace is seen by many as a modern mystery. I would suggest that it may not be quite so mysterious as it seems. The establishment of Haitian sovereignty at the end of the revolution was an astounding feat. Most of the people who had led the revolution were not literate. Many of the soldiers were African-born. Toussaint was not, but he exemplifies the talent and energy of the revolutionaries. Multiple copies of letters handwritten by him show clearly that, as a French brigadier and later a revolutionary, he was still learning French while writing his orders. Others were far less educated than he. The leaders who survived him faced terrible difficulties. The basic infrastructure of the new nation had been largely destroyed during more than a decade of war. Societies based upon slavery are prone to lack all of the institutions that grow up around the activities of free people. And Saint-Domingue had been, in large measure, one enormous plantation manned by nearly 500,000 slaves. There had been no public education, trade or agricultural schools, hospitals, theaters, music schools, newspapers, or any other such services for the slaves. And of course, there had been no political institutions for them either. In contrast to Haiti, the United States began life with no doubt the largest percentage of college graduates of any country in history. It had benefited as well from reestablishing relationships with Britain as soon as the revolution ended, while maintaining its warm ties to France. Not so Haiti. Europe, not to mention the Americans, was simply unable to treat Haiti as just another country. Left to their own, and perhaps the most ironical outcome of all, the Haitian people soon saw the pre-revolutionary social order reasserting itself, even though now there were few Europeans or whites left. Power lay with the army's leaders. Many colored freemen, the affranchis or gens de couleur, were better educated than the newly freed masses. Most were also lighter in color. This affranchi class or group was descended in large measure from French planter fathers and slave mothers. Many had been given educational opportunities in the metropolis. Observers have made much of the color differences between these people and the ex-slaves, and with reason. But at least as important were the class and educational differences perpetuated or deepened during the 19th century. An arresting aspect of this history is the rapidity with which a class of freed people of mixed ancestry had been created and how swiftly it had become propertied and powerful. Since the colony had only been officially ceded to France by Spain in 1697, and since the revolution had begun by 1791, less than a century, about 3 generations, had passed between the official establishment of French rule and the revolution itself. In practice, this means that the grandchildren of French planters and slave mothers had, by the outbreak of the revolution, become the owners of an estimated 1/5 of the cultivated land and 1/5 of the slaves. No one really knows those figures. Some estimate that by 1791, the gens de couleur owned 1/3 of the land and 1/4 of the slaves. One wonders why this outcome should have differed so dramatically from what happened in Jamaica. Though the laws of the Code Noir, which regulated the rights of emancipated slaves, were startlingly liberal, my own view is that much more than law is involved, and that those laws were not so liberally practiced. Those French planters had a sharply different view of kinship and family from their British opposite numbers in Jamaica. Only because of the planters' willingness to recognize and protect their children could so powerful a class of mulatto-free people have arisen so swiftly. As early as the 1780s, the affranchis became deeply involved in a bitter political struggle with the white colonists, both Grand Blanc and Petit Blanc, who were intent upon reducing the civil rights of the free colored. It was during that struggle between two ruling factions that the slave masses first arose in popular revolt. They had no difficulty in finding able leaders, many of them among the affranchis. If there is irony in this interpretation, it is that the revolution had become a reality because French slave owners had raised their children, many of them illegitimate, to be just like themselves. Economically, the most important difference in Haiti before and after the revolution was the destruction of the plantations and the elimination of sugar as an export commodity. The nearly 500,000 slaves whose labor had powered sugar plantations and coffee haciendas, which had made Saint-Domingue the most lucrative European colony in history, were now free. And like the Jamaican people, what they wanted above all was land. It may seem incongruous that the generals who had led the slaves to freedom should have attempted to keep the plantations going. Emperor Henri Christophe in the north used terror and coercion to this end, but he failed. In the south, Governor Dessalines, later Emperor Jacques Ier, tried the same, but to no avail. Under the government of ex-general and affranchi Alexandre Pétion, one of the greatest plantation colonies in history began its transformation into the New World's most thoroughgoing peasant country. Haitian sugar thereafter would be locally produced for the Haitian people only. The dark brown logs they still call rapadou, from Spanish raspadura, or muscovado, and no sugar otherwise was produced in Haiti until, you guessed it, the U.S. occupation in 1915. What happened was an astounding transformation. In Jamaica, the decline in planter power had been slow and grudging. In Puerto Rico, the plantation system was in full decline by the time slavery ended. But in Haiti, a powerful plantation system was reduced in just a few years to ashes. Meanwhile, Haiti maintained some, not all, of its agricultural self-sufficiency. And looking back, we can see that that self-sufficiency rested on proto-peasant production that had flourished under slavery, when the slaves were producing part of their own food. The numerous pre-revolutionary markets, supplied and patronized by thousands of slave cultivators who produced on their own time both their subsistence and the surpluses that they sold to market, were among the most important institutions that the newly freed were able to sustain after the revolution. We learn how peasant cultivators established their farms around the labor of their wives and sons in patrilineal, patrilocal extended families called lacou, producing most of what they consumed, selling their surpluses, and reaching the world market with their coffee. When compared to the Jamaican case, the Haitian similarities and differences are striking. While the institution of family land in Jamaica reveals similar peasant ideals, the chronic shortage of land for peasants in Jamaica, fed by the reluctance of the planter class to provide any alternative to plantation labor, successfully prevented the emergence of extended family landholdings and enterprises. Before population growth, land erosion, and equal inheritance would take their implacable toll, the ancestral homes of the Haitian peasantry not only became economic units, but also centers of religious worship and burying grounds for the ancestors. The original grants by the state were as large as 36 acres in some cases. Though these joint family holdings had already begun to degenerate toward the end of the 19th century, for nearly 100 years, Haiti was where a peasant existence came closest to fulfillment in this hemisphere. Coffee had been a flourishing crop before the revolution. After, it became the chief export of choice, now produced by a free peasantry. Unlike sugar, it lent itself to small-scale production and processing, which continues to this day. Other exports included oil-yielding plants, goat skins, goat horns, bone for buttons, beeswax, saffron. They were all sold, as was coffee, to merchants who set up their stands near the marketplaces, later carrying their purchases to a port of embarkation. These were the products of a people who had had no opportunity earlier to learn manufacturing skills or advanced crafts. They made baskets and wooden stools for themselves and for local markets, and at a later time the countryside boasted of smiths and cobblers, tanners and furniture makers, and eventually even shoemakers and tailors. I can say that half a century ago when I worked there, it was still easy to find in Haiti forges and sugar mills and tanneries that were hardly changed from those typical of the late 17th century. By By 1830, Haiti was no longer a plantation colony making sugar, rum, and molasses for the French consumer. It had become a relatively peaceful, poor, and backward economy, supporting a large but socially differentiated peasant population. There were rich peasants and poor peasants and landless people working for the landed. Rural, mostly uneducated, Haiti's 19th century peasantry more and more became fair game for its own elite. At the outset, free Haiti's ruling class needed to find ways to gather the fruits of the labor of the national peasantry. That is not so easy to do as it sounds. When a peasantry consumes most of what it produces and produces most of what it consumes, its labor is harder to steal. Guns were used and labor was stolen, but there are also some things that a peasantry must have and cannot produce, and to pay for those it must sell some of its product. Every link to the market that a peasant feels he must have can be made into an instrument by which to exact a portion of his productivity. The Haitian ruling group became expert in such exaction. An intermediary class of coffee exporters, lawyers, doctors, military officers, and petty bureaucrats soon contrived to rest its collective weight upon the backs of the peasantry, who were also pushed around by those fellow peasants richer or politically better connected than they. For nearly a century, the free Haitian people lived far, far better than they could have imagined when they were slaves. But they were ill-served by governments interested only in siphoning off their productivity. That general aspect of the picture has not changed ever since. My Jamaican experiences had made me interested in how market systems function in peasant societies. When I prepared to do fieldwork in Haiti, I did so as part of an interest in the institutions that had developed over time that tied together internally the emergent nations of the tropical Americas. Of course, religious institutions come to mind immediately. In Haiti, peasants everywhere practice a religion called Vodun, and as Skip warned the speaker earlier today, it can be called, but shouldn't, voodoo. But Vodun has no ancestral text, no Quran, no Bible. It has no hierarchy, no archbishops, no cardinals. It has no seminary, theological or not. There are no uniforms. There's not even bingo. Vodun is a national religion, as is Catholicism, but it lacks any national institutional structure. Though of national importance because of the widely shared general beliefs of the people, it does not possess any of the organizational attributes associated with real religions, as in, say, the US or Europe. It is rather more like a collection of local cults. Indeed, outside the capital and a few towns, in Haiti, national institutions are hardly ever represented by links on the local level, except for the chef de section, who are local political bosses, if you will, linked to the state. Otherwise, the villages of Haiti can hardly be said to be tied by anything to the national leadership. Working in Haiti, I came to think that the only national institution there might be the market system. Much more quickly and shallowly than I would like, let me describe that system. When I did my fieldwork in Haiti in 1958-59, 8 out of 10 Haitians were peasants, most of them producing their own subsistence. They did so without imported steel tools, without internal combustion engines, without running water, kerosene stoves, or electricity, and in a country that had, outside the towns, no paved roads, no transport service, no postal service, no schools, no hospitals, no functioning agricultural extension, or information media, except what they themselves referred to humorously as telediol, loosely translatable as telemouth. They do talk, and talk travels fast, and I'll give some examples. In spite of being heavily taxed in every way the state could think of, the Haitian peasantry, not literate, uneducated, without medical care, fed itself fairly well and supported on its back the entire state apparatus. There must be few countries in the world, and this is saying a great deal, where so many bureaucrats are supported by so poor a peasantry to supply in return so little in the way of help, advice, or protection. Against that depressing landscape, the internal market system by which all of the agricultural produce of the countryside destined for local consumption reached its consumers touched every city, town, and rural district in Haiti. The markets numbered in the hundreds. In the years I worked there, over 54,000 licensed intermediaries plied their skills across the land. All produce for export reached the ports through bulk buyers whose activities grew up alongside the market system and were closely allied to it, and I dare say could not have functioned without the market system. The commission buyers who lined the roads near a market I studied in 58-59 purchased raw produce for export: vetiver, beeswax, honey, goatskins, coffee, from peasants who came to town to sell their product and to shop at the marketplace before returning home. Especially important was coffee, which went mostly to Germany. Nearly every one of the intermediaries known in Haiti as revendeurs or commerçants or Madame Sarah. This latter name is the name of a very noisy bird that clusters in the trees and chatters. Nearly all of these revendeurs and commerçants are female. It was common to see 3 or 4 daughters of the same woman, all dressed identically, usually in blue denim dresses and orange head ties, walking single file behind their mother to market, each with a load of appropriate size on her head. Marketing is to Haitian females as farming is to Jamaican males. And though there are women who cultivate and men who market, the division of labor is real. It is a key to understanding how Haitian peasants deal with the economics of everyday life. Which brings me to my friend Nana, a market woman from Duverger in the 5th rural section of Enslaved, near the Fondé-Nègre market in the southern peninsula. Planning my field work, I had decided to pick a large regional marketplace in the north of Haiti and another in the south, since the cultural differences between those regions are substantial, even lexically substantial. In the south, I visited several markets before settling on Fondé-Nègre, which had Tuesday as its major market day. Fondé-Nègre, and I'm now pronouncing it Haitian rather than French, is not located in a town. To some extent, markets and towns are controlled by the local businesses because marketers do not go elsewhere to buy in stores. At one time, the government actually forced the marketplaces into the towns in order to give more business to local people. They spared a few, and Fondé-Nègre was one of them. This marketplace would welcome 15,000 buyers and sellers on a brisk Tuesday. And here, it is the storekeepers who must travel to sell. And as a consequence, buyers get a better deal. I'd already gotten to know someone from that district and learned about Madame Anaïs Adrien, a businesswoman or commerçant there. Her hamlet, Duverger, is simply a collection of scattered homesteads and fields located about a 2-mile walk from the marketplace. Nana was among dozens of women marketers whom I got to know around Fondé-Nègre. In Haiti, unlike Jamaica, I was not trying to study a community. I was rather trying to learn about the marketers who peopled the nationwide system, and I could not really claim to have settled anywhere, though I had a place to sleep in Fondé-Nègre and another in Saint Raphael in the north. Nana taught me an enormous amount about marketing and about her own life. When I first came to know her, she was in her late 50s, a plump, silent woman, deeply intent upon her business ventures. Every 2 weeks she made a round trip from her village to the capital, Port-au-Prince, buying and selling. I thought at first that she really had no other interest but her children. When one of my students, who I helped to settle in her village, told me that she had been an enthusiastic and generous supporter of Vodun, I was genuinely surprised. With me, she was mostly silent, even shy, until my interest in her work got her interested. Nana was born in 1902 and had been going to market since her infancy. Her first business dealing was in sugar. Her mother gave her a centime to buy a packet of sugar, which she resold on returning home for 2 centimes. She explained to me that the centime she earned was not l'argent, it was mama l'argent. Not money, capital. Nana's mother traveled regularly to Port-au-Prince before the American occupation in 1915, and occasionally Nana would be taken along. 4 days' travel each way by mule. In her lifetime thereafter, Nana learned how to buy and sell, how to judge quality, how to cipher. Like most Haitian market women, Nana could not read or write, and how to cope with the many perils of market trade. She had raised 5 children mostly by herself. Her husband had died in '39 when the youngest was but 2, hiring labor to work her land, but getting most of her income from her marketing. Though she had begun as a local revendeuse at Fond-des-Nègres, by the time I knew her, she'd been doing much more serious and demanding work for 9 years. Her income was very substantial by Haitian rural standards, grossing as much as US $4,000 monthly. Now remember, this lady can't read and write. Every other Friday, she carried produce she had purchased during the weekly market in the neighboring town of La Zille and around her own rural section to Port-au-Prince by truck. Depending on season and availability, she carried husked and unhusked sorghum, pitimi, that's the grain of the Haitian peasants. The only place in the New World where sorghum is eaten as a daily food. And it's African in origin, of course. And it's called millet, pitimi, but it's not. It's sorghum. Ginger, peanuts, pumpkins, fowl, and eggs. She would stay till Monday morning in the city, leaving on Friday, returning on Monday, selling and sleeping on sacks of grain in the depot, then buying goods to carry back to her home village. It is difficult to imagine the difficulties and dangers with which each such trip confronts the intermediary. Most of the food carried is highly perishable. Trucks often go off the road and sometimes fall into ravines. Heavy rains make rivers impassable. Dealers cheat. Patrons go back on their word. There are thieves, some very clever. I'll interrupt myself because you might like this. There's a particular kind of thief in Haiti, and women, to prevent theft, keep in their money bags sesame seeds, which are to protect them against theft. The little bag is called a sakit, and it's worn under the blouse and between the breasts on a string. And if you ask a woman to see her sakit, as I often would do, and she would take it out to show it to me, so I could see if she had sesame seeds. And if I asked why she had sesame, she would always say they're to keep someone from stealing my money. And the way it works is this kind of person takes a coin and pays for the produce with the coin, and she puts it into her sakit, and that coin allows him to wish out of her sakit all of her money. And those thieves are called aosa. Some of you who are familiar with Africa may want to guess at the origin of that name for those thieves. Yet Nana pursued her profession with zeal and even pleasure, each round trip a measure of her skill and success. In order to understand better her mode of operation, I once carried her and her stock to Port-au-Prince in my Land Rover. It was an enjoyable trip, only about 90 miles, but nearly 6 hours over difficult terrain, with only 1 gas station and 6 Duvalier-inspired guard posts en route. Nana carried bread, bananas, water, and clairin, the local raw rum, to consume en route with her on every trip. And so she sat alongside me eating bread, bananas, water, and clairin. On reaching the city, I took her to her regular depot, watched the unloading of her stock while she greeted her friends, and we set the time for our return trip on Monday. I visited her each day in the depot for several hours to watch and learn about her transactions. When I would leave her at night, I would drive to my pension through the market area. I was familiar enough to the police there to be left alone. The market streets at midnight were, as always, lined with hundreds of sleeping women from all over the nation, each on her own burlap sack. Monday morning, we loaded up 3 5-gallon tins of lard, 2 boxes of locally made soap, 1 white and 1 yellow. They look the same, but the one's called savon jaune, the other's called savon blanc. One you wash your face with, the other you wash your laundry with. I wouldn't want to wash my face with a savon blanc, but 2 cases of soap, 25 gallons of clairin, some yards of blue denim, and a few items for special requests. Richer than most marketers, Nana was able to leave some of her less perishable stock at the depot to be sold by associates or the depot owner during the week when prices often rise. Women with less capital can't hold back that way. We got back to Fond-des-Nègres that afternoon and deposited the stock in the house of a commaire, from which it would be moved by Bourreau to Nana's house in Duverger the following day. It was always thrilling to grasp just how smart Nana was, sharpened by her lifetime in the market. I would ask her about local marketing by choosing a hypothetical situation of a classic kind. For example, one quickly learns in a Haitian market that sellers of the same item gather in the same place, and that the same item always seems to sell at the same asking price. In fact, it doesn't, but it seems to. And if you ask a Haitian market woman, how do you know at what price to sell, she will always answer, I don't know at what price to sell, I only know at what price I bought. And the market tells her the price, and that's what markets are supposed to do. A half a dozen women selling red beans in the same place wait for the first people to marchander, to comparison shop. And as the comparison shop goes on and the first purchase is made, the price emerges. And if the price emerges at 3 gourds the gros marmite, everybody sells at 3 gourds the gros marmite. So it looks like what it's supposed to. It looks like perfect competition. I say to Nana, she and her friends would be selling red beans at 3.5 gourds the gros marmite. And a new marketer appears, and this marketer, she's willing to sell at 3. What would they do, I say? And Nana says to me, it's the perfect answer, PhD in economics, right there. How much stock has she got? And I say, she has a half a dozen gros marmite. And she says, we let her sell. And then I say, she has a lot. She says, we tried to buy her out. So that Nana knew about oligopsony, and she also knew about capital and marginal utility and long-term supply costs and zero opportunity costs and arbitrage. She just didn't need all that claptrap to describe what she was doing. I toyed with the idea, and I'm sorry I gave it up, of doing a glossary of modern economics in Haitian, because we're constantly being told that these primitive languages cannot express abstract concepts. Of course, sometimes not even experience, intelligence, and courage are enough. When money is scarce in Port-au-Prince and the local supply of food piles up, skill alone cannot change the situation. The taxes that Macham pay were always extortionate, and there are other catastrophes besides gluts and taxes, such as political violence. In 1957, while she slept in a Port-au-Prince depot, Nana was robbed of nearly 1,000 gourds, $200 US, and she almost gave up her trips then, she told me. In my work with her and with market women generally, I discovered significant similarities to some of the economic maneuvers reported for West African marketers by anthropologists and economists who had worked there. In societies where capital is dear and labor cheap, people engage in near superhuman feats to get their hands on operating capital, and informal interest rates can be astronomical. Haitian market women were willing to pay interest for 3 days' use of capital that would have amounted to hundreds of % if calculated on an annual basis. The West African practice of gold coasting, which requires the swift sale of goods at an extremely low rate of profit so that the supplier can be paid off in as little as 72 hours, was common in Haitian markets in the capital. Same thing as they report on the Gold Coast. Such transoceanic similarities seem to argue for a common cultural heritage, and I think in some cases with good cause. In others, it appears to me more to be a matter of similarity between the economic situations than of some common cultural past. The contributions that people like Nana make to their society are enormous. Thousands of industrious and daring Haitians, many of them grandmothers, match the output of their husbands and sons, support scores of trucks, feed the cities, sustain the agricultural countryside, educate their children who cannot be thought to receive any education other than at high cost. And it is these unlettered peasants who make the internal market system the vibrant institution it has been ever since Moreau de Saint-Méry wrote so poetically about the great slave marketplace of Cluny in Cap Français more than 2 centuries ago. In their marketing, Haiti's women are economically independent of their families. No Haitian husband would dream of asking his wife to use her capital for any expense he incurs. All Haitian husbands take great pride in the marketing skills of their wives. Marketing by women, that is, constitutes a near-perfect opposition to the agricultural labor of men. And the attitudes of men and women about their economic labors are more modern than, let us say, those of most of us on Harvard Square. A woman's success is never her husband's shame. This seeming modernity is based on old values that go back, I'm sure, at least to slavery times, and in some regards, quite possibly, to Africa itself. Tom Belnavis in Jamaica and Nana Adrienne in Haiti, both of them now gone, represent for me the tragedy of Caribbean peasant life. In the aftermath of slavery, the ancestors of such people built with enormous energy and determination new ways of life for themselves, ways of seeing and doing that drew on their pasts. In both societies, peasant aspirations were frustrated. In Jamaica, planter ideology was wedded to racism and to contempt for the peasantry. In Haiti, where a peasantry flourished, the ruling elite sucked the blood of the peasantry. People like Nana, instead of being assisted to build their businesses, were beaten back by taxation and deprived of an infrastructure of roads, buses, decent market roofing, clean toilets, which the taxes they paid should have given them. In Jamaica, the peasantry has declined with each passing day. In Haiti, the peasantry is dying now. But I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to say more about what the culture history of these two countries can explain for us. Using what has been said so far, I would like here to develop more exactly what I take to be the meaning of the term creolization. It is a word now very fashionable in the social sciences, and it may be useful to try to pin it down to at least one meaning, though there may indeed be others. I think of the Caribbean region as the seat of genuine creolization, and of the term as describing a cultural process that was largely limited to a particular time period. We have seen how, both in Jamaica and in Haiti, a specific sort of social structure and economy was put in place by the European conquerors. In both, the indigenous population died off and was killed off. When the plantation system was put in place, it was manned by an ever-increasing number of enslaved and imported Africans. Those people were drawn from a large number of culturally and linguistically different societies. There were, after all, no Negroes until the West invented the category. Societies like Jamaica and Saint-Domingue became testing grounds for unprecedented culture change and culture building. The first weaving together of African and European traditions while slavery still flourished was a remarkable achievement. It is embodied in language, cuisine, folklore and song, social organization, religion, in the texture of economic life, and in all else. If I call this culture-building creolization by that term, I do not mean the mixing, which is a generic aspect of cultural behavior nearly every occasion when peoples meet, but the building, which is something else again. The building in these cases involved at least two different groups, one power-holding and the other near powerless. One group was culturally much more homogeneous than the other, but neither group was native to the land in which they met. That is to say, both Europeans and Africans came from elsewhere, and the land they had come to occupy was new to them both. What happened to them culturally and linguistically in their new habitat was, at least at first, a new experience for them. Note that my stress is upon synthesis, not upon mixing. That such synthesis must be constructed socially over time can easily be overlooked in the thrill of mixture. We are excited by the idea of eating Thai spring rolls that have been made with maize tortillas rather than rice flour crepe, and even more excited if we see two Senegalese eating them in Mexico City. But what distinguishes the process of creolization is not the putting together of different things. It is the building of social institutions, and to some degree building them from scratch. It is within those growing institutions that substances, ideas, memories, and beliefs are given a collective life. It is by means of a latticework or framework of institutions that patterns of behavior, culture, can grow and be transmitted. In retrospect, one sees that people's needs, their social needs, function as a kind of ghost template for that latticework, which is built up out of the acts that give substance to institutions. A child dies, and it doesn't die waiting for the Hollywood director to take its picture. These folks did not arrive with hair dryers or water bottles. They were not on a cook's tour. A child dies. How will its death be rationalized? What behaviors embody grief, purify, stand for, distill the event socially when the community consists of people who do not yet have a language in common, who have been torn from a dozen different cultures and thrust into this situation? When mourners share nothing more than their ongoing oppression and memories of a past that are slightly different for each of them, how do they find a shared symbolic solution for their grief that they can accept collectively? The creolization process was inherently one in which such awful questions had to be addressed and creatively answered. They did not have to do with eating spring rolls. They did not have to do with mixing. They had to do with surviving. The traumatic events that brought together European masters and captive Africans in places that were new to them both had certain general effects upon the enslaved. It was an individualizing experience involving people who had been forcibly separated from family, village, language, work, religion, and all else. It was also an intensely drastic resocializing process. Under pain of death, the slaves had to be seasoned, as they say, for plantation life. But seasoning covered much more than learning to labor. The simplest acts now had to be relearned by each individual: to speak, to dress, to eat, how to court, how to marry, how to build ties of kinship, to trace genealogy, to manage life crises like the death of a child. Under the prevailing conditions, the enslaved had to fashion group practices out of what individuals recalled and find ways to act out together. It was not that there were no traditions. The challenge the enslaved faced was that there were many traditions out of which a body of collective social acts had to be fashioned. The slaves could not bring with them any of the material apparatus of their own cultures: ritual objects, particular foods or beverages, weapons, tools, except under the most extraordinary of circumstances. What they carried in their hearts, heads, and hands enabled them at times to reproduce those things, often with great aesthetic character. But doing so required resourcefulness, innovativeness, great motivation, and often stealth. Missing as well were the contexts provided by the larger institutions in the homeland, which gave to such objects their distinctive culturally specific meanings. Among the enslaved, there would be sometimes a smith, but there was no forge. There was no blacksmith's guild. Occasionally there were princes, too, but there were no thrones or courts or kings. Coming as they did from different societies, the slaves did not share the same language, religion, or culture. Cultural differences were perceived most of the time as occurring among individuals, not groups. Of course, there were important exceptions to this picture where persons of the same cultural background could band together socially, but the rule was otherwise. I offer here the severest rendering of the conditions under which creolization began. In practice, it must have been modified in many ways, but I believe that it accurately describes what was true for most of the enslaved in most places and at most times in the New World plantation setting. But beyond the differences among the enslaved themselves, there was the enormous chasm between them and the masters. Creolization was not a reworking only of African materials in the new environment, but rather a reworking of African and other materials. The commonest example is language, but I will touch on it here only in a word. Creole languages took shape in many geographical loci in the New World with particular intensity in the Caribbean region. Such languages draw on at least two linguistic traditions. Like most of us, and unlike most languages, Creole languages have two parents, not one. One is European, the other is African. Out of the creolizing process, there is born a new and different language. A language such as Haitian Creole is not in the Gallo-Romance family, nor can it be defensibly classified in any African language family. It is sui generis. It is a Creole language. It is born of the encounter of different speaking groups and of biological realities. When the slaves had children, the language that the slaves created would become the native language of their children. Creole languages cannot be classified, Creole cultures cannot be classified like Creole languages. But like those languages, they are theoretically interesting not because they are hybridized, which of course they are, but because each represents a tertium quid, a living new culture created under terrible constraints, but that lived on in the behavior and values of its carriers. The profoundest drama of the Caribbean region, I think, lies in its rootedness in this violent and degraded past. That is because it stands to this day as a testament to the courage and creativity of those millions who were dragged from their hearths in the single most terrible demographic event in history. The Jamaican and Haitian people are their descendants. I believe that the way that Nana Adrien and those thousands of others like her talked and worked and lived tell us about that past. And that is my second ancient colony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mintz, for that very vivid and very richly ethnographic talk and historical talk that was unfailingly interesting and so elegantly crafted. It was a real pleasure to listen to it as well. Professor Mintz has asked me to call on you for questions because he claims he can't necessarily see. I'm not that much taller, so I may have to stand to see the questions from the back, but that's to ensure that everyone has a chance to ask a question. So please, yes, sir.
The cowrie share. The cowrie share, the ancient monetary system in Africa, I want to ask whether any one of these, were used, in Haiti. Whether this type of cowrie, share were used in Haiti. And my second question is.
Cowrie shells?
Cowrie share, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Were they used any time in Haiti?
Yeah.
My second question is, when the French got there, did they find any life that can be referred to as the Aborigines?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. I'll try to answer both those questions in order and briefly. Cowrie shells are known in Haiti, but they're imported. And they're largely imported from West Africa. And they turn up particularly in religious practice. But it's much more common to find them in Cuba, where if you see the head of Shango, with the form of the head of Shango is usually accompanied by 3 eyes that are cowries. In Haiti they appear, but rarely. They're not commonly used in any religious practice known to me. I should say I'm the only white man who ever went to Haiti that didn't make a study of Vodun. So I'm not an expert on this. I figured somebody should study something else like markets, so I didn't. The second question had to do with whether there was an Aboriginal population on that island. That island is the island of initial contact by Columbus. He passed by Watlington, Guarahani, in the Bahamas, and then he stopped and left people on the north coast of Santo Domingo. They call the island Santo Domingo. On his first voyage, he left people there. When he came back the next year, they were all gone. But that island was occupied by Taino people and had a substantial population. There's been a good deal of argument about how many, but it was well occupied by agricultural people. And there was still a marginal group of non-agricultural hunters and gatherers in the northwestern corner of the island. So you had 2 culturally different Aboriginal groups living in Santo Domingo at the time of the original discovery. The French did not come officially until 1697 by the Treaty of Ryswick, but they had been there about 15 years before then. Western Santo Domingo became a favorite hangout for Navy deserters, runaways, Maroons, all kinds of people trying to get away from constituted authority, gathered in Western Santo Domingo. The Spaniards drove them out repeatedly, but eventually they ceded the western third of Santo Domingo to the French, and it became Saint-Domingue in 1697.
Professor Gates?
Sid, I wanted to ask you about the phrase building from scratch. You know, when you were about to give your definition of creolizing. Am I correct that if one could see a tension between the argument that the slaves came to the New World with culture, and on the other hand, that they were building from scratch, right? And it's, on the one hand, we want to give the slaves tremendous credit and applaud their agency, right? So there's a tendency to err on how much they didn't bring with them. I mean, no one builds from scratch. I mean, that phrase is impossible. You always bring something. And so, and we were talking last night at dinner, and everybody here is familiar with all the debates, I mean, epitomized by Herskovitz and Frank Fraser, as you call him. I thought that was cute. I never heard anybody call you Frank.
Well, I called him Frank, or they knew him.
I know you did. That's great. But, you know, there's a tension between these two positions. That either, you know, the American Negro, broadly defined, was sui generis, or there's a Pan-African continuation. So that's the first thing I want to address. But it seems to me to be a tension in the way that you define creolization. The second thing is, John McWhorter gave the linguist. So controversial politically, but you know, his linguistic stuff is really excellent. And maybe everybody's familiar with this, but I almost fell off my chair in the fall when he was in this very room, and he said that there were Akan linguists who were sent from the castles, you know, in the Gold Coast, to the New World to train the new slaves to speak. So the whole process of culture formation, while we romanticize it by talking about these people being all thrown together, et cetera, in a very atomistic way, is not really the case. It's much more complex than that.
I want to answer this carefully because I plainly did not explain myself well with the phrase from scratch. And that's important. I cede to no man my willingness to accept provable and established African origins for anything. The phrase refers not to cultural content, but to institutions. What I want to get people to do is to shift their attention away from the two-headed axe of Shango to religious institutions and the building of institutions. Objects, plants, words, that's easy. Africa poured thousands of those things into the Americas through the slaves.
But if I'm a Babalawo of the Yoruba, and I'm tossed on a slave ship, and I have 256,000 verses from the Ifa Oracle in my head, am I an institution or not?
You're not an institution. Hell no, you're not an institution.
If I have the whole purpose...
Not unless everybody in the particular plantation where you live decides that you're Babalawo and starts to listen and learn your verses.
But that quickly happened.
Well, but it didn't happen a hell of a lot or in a hell of a lot of places. Where it did, yes.
Okay.
Then I think it's important to draw a distinction between individual memory and capacity and the social acceptance of a form of collective behavior. Because until you get that behavior, you don't have an institution. You got a crowd. And I think that's important because the thing that perpetuates the objects and verses is a social grouping that accepts this as its normative behavior. So when I say from scratch, I don't mean cultural content. I'm talking about the institutions which have to exist for the content to find a place to be contextualized.
Well, how did Yoruba-based religions then thrive so broadly throughout the New World?
Well, when you say Yoruba-based, you mean that there are important elements of Yoruba religion that are taken up in the New World, and where that happened, it was because there were a lot of Yoruba, like Cuba. Sure, wherever you can get a grouping, a congregation of folk who have the same language and the same religious tradition, then yeah, that makes it no difference from a bunch of Italians in Providence, Rhode Island. Sure. But those Italians got to Providence under very different conditions from the conditions that faced those Africans.
No, they did, but I'm still confused about when an institution is an institution and when it's not, in your definition. And I don't want to hug, because I am your dinner. I'll beat you up all night long. All right.
Yes.
Hi, I really appreciate, I just loved your talk. Two questions, though. One question comes to mind. We had the First Lady of Haiti come to speak to us. And one of the points that she made is related to what you said about the indemnity that Haiti had to pay to France. And in common parlance today, we would call that reparations. Huge amount of money, far more than what Jefferson paid for Louisiana.
Yeah.
But one of the arguments is that it was that exacting from France that then caused the Haitian government to exact so much from its peasants because of, it was just tremendous, even by our standards today.
Yeah.
So did that have a great deal to do with the larger trajectory of the market economy? And then the second question I had, and it also relates to creolization, but from a much later period. If you look at Jamaica and then you look at a place like Haiti, Jamaica also had significantly, later on though, an Asian population, Indians, Chinese, who did mix, who did bring their cultures, who literally created children who are mixed with those ancestries. I don't think Haiti quite had that combination, at least, and can you speak to that as well? Thank you.
Well, as to the first, indeed, the paying of the indemnities did fix the Haitian government in a mode of extraction that they never successfully or even tried to reverse. It became then chronic, a chronic aspect of Haitian life. And it reached a parlous point at the time that I worked there 50 years ago. One of the few things that Duvalier did that was good was to get rid of a lot of those taxes. A tiny 9-year-old girl who arrived at the market with a handful of string beans had to pay taxes on her sale. So it became parlous. So as to the first, yes, there was a definite connection. As to the second, now you have to tell me again what the second was.
The second one was that in this process of creolization.
Oh yes, about the, yeah, Haiti received nobody from anywhere. And it differs in large measure from other Caribbean countries because there was no sugar industry to keep pulling in people from all kinds of places. In fact, Haiti became an exporter and exported at least 80,000 people to Cuba when the United States developed the sugar industry there after their occupation. So Haiti became a net exporter rather than an importer. And that does make it different from most other Caribbean states. But were you intending to say that the movement of those peoples into Jamaica represented a different phase in creolization?
Yes.
I have a problem with that, and I'll tell you what it is in two ways. First of all, if what I've described happened in Peru, then I would say Peru had undergone a process of creolization. But that's not what happened in Peru, which had a very substantial indigenous population of its own upon which the Europeans imposed a system of rule. So what happened in the process of mixing of materials there is a very different, if you want to call that a Creole society, you want to say mine's A and that's B, okay. But what I'm talking about is highly distinctive and rare, I think, and very Caribbean. The second example is the United States. People come here from everywhere. They get off the boat and tell us the Bill of Rights as they hit the ground. I mean, we're Creolized like crazy. So everybody's a Creole country.
Well, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
But we do have a very common word that we use all the time called Americanized.
Yeah.
And we understand what Americanized
Yeah,
means.
we do.
Okay, but in Jamaica, I wouldn't call those people Americanized. Okay, but when I see...
Would you call them Jamaicanized?
Yes, and that to me is a creolization. And when I see an Indian person, and he is clearly a Jamaican, isn't that creolization?
When you see an Indian person here, and he's clearly American, what is he then?
He's Americanized.
Huh? He's
Americanized.
And that guy's...
If he's culturally, if he's, just everything culturally is Jamaican in that person. And if you talk about the weaving of families, where you can see the mixed, these people would be African descended, but they have Chinese grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
They have, I guess what I'm asking is, isn't there some kind of cultural implication involved there? Isn't there something from someplace else that's also forming part of this population that is creolized and not just speaking of Africa?
I think, as with Skip, we're going to have to set aside another week or two to discuss this, but let me just say one thing which I think may be relevant. I always want to drop it in there and then we can go on. In this country, since I'm also a student of food, I'm very interested in what happens with food. I'm interested in the way the bagel became American. Because when I was a boy, being a Jew, a bagel was what I ate, it wasn't what other people ate. The bagel became American. And you know at the point when the bagel became American, the Jews became American too? When pasta became American food, the Italians started to join the Republican Party. When you can... And the Jews joined the Republican Party too. You can now, so talk about creolization. These are things coming from other places that we make into our own. And that, if you want to call that a creolizing process, what you've done is you've taken a word that describes a historically specific situation involving millions and millions of people who were brought here as slaves, and you're going to now describe those Senegalese eating that rice cookie in downtown Stockholm. And I think that's a mistake.
The gentleman.
Yes. Professor Bates, Dr. Gates, all I can say to you and your institutions is this: Rankadedi. It's Europe, it's Hausa, which means may you live forever. Because in most of your writings, some of the writings of Africans and current Americans, you have exposed certain aspects of the psychosocial, anthropological beliefs of man's inhumanity to man.
Well, thank you.
A tribal and tribal, ethnological, and universal. The truth about it is this, that even now, I was reading a book 3 days ago, a current book written by Peter Hamil, Forever. And in that book, he spoke about Babalauru, and he showed how the Irish and the blacks in New York were together. And your institution, you have done a lot, but I was wondering whether you have got one of your students to do a critique on 2 books, Professor Mintz, about Haiti, and one of those books was The Black Jacobins, and the other was The Caribbean. Because at the time C.R.L. James wrote The Black Jacobins, the publisher had to edit it so much. I wish there could be a constructive critique in current affairs, because a lot of things have come out now. And I was wondering whether a student could do that. Because, C.R.L. James, and then another thing which I must congratulate you on is that you carried on the work of, what's this man's name? This guy, Williams.
Eric.
Yeah, Eric Williams. You remember Capitalism and Sugar?
Capitalism and Slavery.
Slavery and Sugar, yeah. Okay. And you're carrying out. That was what I just want to tell you.
Well, first of all, I'll answer my part. Thank you very
Please
much.
do.
We all are indebted to C.L.R. James. I first read C.L.R. James as an undergraduate at Yale. I met C.L.R. James because that man there, the young man with the premature gray hair, who was chair of Afro-American Studies, brought Jan Carew brought C.L.R. James to lecture. They all told us that we were ignorant, arrogant, little sellouts in danger of proving Herbert Marcuse's argument in 1958 in affirmative action, well, they didn't call that 58, was just going to produce a new crop of the black bourgeoisie. And so we had, and he pointed those long, skinny fingers and said that we had to fight for revolution and fight for black people. I'll never forget that. And we have plenty of students studying, and I think there is a new edition of Black John. But Sid needs to answer your other point. Go ahead.
I'm not sure how to say this, but the figures to whom you are referring, such as Cyril James and Eric Williams, I think are well known to those of us who are serious students of the Afro-American experience, and I can assure you that both of them receive continued attention in our classes and from us. At the very meeting when Cyril was in New Haven lecturing for Skip, my wife and I had him to dinner, and he ate well and enjoyed the food, and at the end of the meal said to me, "You know, I like it here at Yale, Sidney. Why don't you get me a professorship?"
Sir, the gentleman in the back row.
You can ask your next one at the reception. Thank you.
Where are you pointing at?
Yes, the gentleman there.
Listening to you talk about the trading activities of Nana in Haiti, my mind went back to West African traders, especially those in Ghana. And I was also reminded that these are traders, many are illiterate, but they're very astute in terms of economics and finances.
Yes.
They also seldom receive any support in terms of capital or infrastructure from the government. They often talk about luck and fate, using these as categories to describe the unpredictable, especially when government gets vicious. And it's always interesting to hear very astute people in terms of economics and finance. They always talk about luck and fate and stuff like that. And I thought if you could connect this into how traders view prosperity and unpredictable things like luck.
Yeah. Well, I can't really say much other than from my conversations with my friends in Haiti 50 years ago. I think whenever people work in a situation that is highly predictable, including not only marketing but baseball, they become quite superstitious and invoke whatever they can in order to make things go the way they want. And among the things that work are rabbit's feet, prayer. We know there are a number of different ways to try to tilt in the direction in which we want to go. But beyond that, I really have nothing to offer. Certainly they talked about good luck and bad luck. I was very interested in the structural constraints under which they worked. I knew a very gifted market woman who was wonderful. She bought a truck. She bought a truck, and she hired a driver. And the driver took everything she had. The difficulty people at that level of activity have in obtaining credit or proper facilities or all of the things they need. You plainly can't become a millionaire unless you go to Litauer school. There's no way of... But there, long before there was a Litauer, there were these women making money in markets and showing astuteness and skill at economic activity. And I think that they deserve a voice. But as to luck, plainly, they all use the term and they all believe in it.
Thank you for your question. I'm afraid we only have time for one more. So the gentleman at the side.
Quick question. I have a lot of those. One commentary quick is that we did receive in the late 1890s a group of primarily Syrian and Lebanese to Haiti. And then after 1960s, particularly 1967, with the Israeli-Palestinian war, a group of Palestinians did move to Haiti. As a matter of fact, currently, one of the largest immigrants into Haiti are Palestinians. The questions that I have for you is how can you differentiate between the commerçants de bord de mer, which is the seaport commerce merchants, versus the rich peasant merchants? But how would you differentiate these two in terms of permanent mentality?
I have difficulty in addressing it briefly because I think it's a hard question to simplify. But I would say one thing that I think is worth keeping in mind. For every Lebanese who came to Haiti seeking to live there, there were hundreds of people who desired to leave. So what this means is that the same economic situation, viewed from the point of view of a Haitian peasant or a poor person, and viewed from the point of view of a Lebanese businessman who has capital and comes from another place, is not the same economic situation. Always in talking about those things, we have to take it from the point of view of who's looking, because it can be a great opportunity for one person and simply continuing suffering for another. I'm sorry I can't do it more seriously than that.
Well, thank you very much for that. Please join us at the reception.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction.